As we've been talking about be rich, we talked about being rich in good deeds and being generous. And we found one of the guys, the Apostle Paul, who in the Bible was writing to his to this man that he'd been mentoring, Timothy. He tells him to tell the people who are rich in their congregations, in their churches, there locally, where Timothy was in Ephesus. He said, hey, encourage the people that are rich to be rich in good deeds, not to just trust in money. And so last week we talked about money, and we said this as we started off. We said that when it comes to money, the more we acquire, the more we desire to acquire more. We said that this is not a rich people problem, not a poor people problem. It's a people problem. It's a problem with greed, and all of us struggle with this. And we talked last week about the struggle, right? The very real struggle with this exact statement here. And so the idea that we talked about last week, and we're going to kind of build on today, is the best way to combat greed in our hearts is to give generously with our hands. And last week we had a call to action for everyone to give $39.95 so that we could generously give that all away to our nonprofit partners. And we've had over 20 people participate in that. And not everyone was able to give $39.95, and some people were able to give a little more to kind of make up for others who weren't. We kind of are all in this together, and we're asking for 100% participation. And if that's a number, maybe you say, I can't give $39.95 at this time, but I can give something and I want to participate. We want you to participate. The number isn't important. The number we're looking for is 100% participation. We want everyone to be rich and to be generous. Why? Because this is a way to begin to combat greed in our hearts. So you can still do that. You can do that online, dtlvfaith.com/b-rich. You can go there, or you can do it using one of the envelopes on the table there. You can just mark be rich, and you can put some money in the envelope and drop it in our drop box there at the back. And all of that, 100% of that, we will be collecting and giving away, 100% of it, again, to collectively do what we're already asked to do individually as we combat greed in our hearts. And we looked at some stats last week when it came to generosity and how people broke down generosity. And we said that kind of the 5 predominant ways people viewed generosity was service, emotional support, money, hospitality, and gifts. But money was actually third on that list. And most people view generosity as being generous with your time and your energy, right, through service and through emotional support. And we look at that across all generations, that there's a dominant view of generosity having to do with service and emotional support. So it's the idea that people want to be generous with their time and with their energy towards other people. And it's because I think this is true right here. Most of us don't want to just be compassionate to people. We want to be compassionate people. Right? Like there's a difference between being compassionate to people and being a compassionate person. I'm willing to bet that if you died and someone gave your eulogy and they described you as a compassionate person, like that would be a good thing, right? Like no one in there would be like, yeah, that guy was compassionate. Can you believe that? Right? Because compassion is a thing that we would all seek, that we all want to be a part of. And we don't want to just be compassionate to people. We want to be compassionate people. We want that to be part of our identity. And I think that comes from somewhere. I think it comes from being made in the image of God. We talk about God as the source of everything that exists. And we believe that God is a generous, compassionate God. And I believe that when compassion comes out in us, what we are simply doing is mirroring the thing that we were created to be in the first place. The very image of God fingerprinted on our life. And I think that when Jesus was here on earth, one of the things that was described about him was that when we looked at Jesus, one of his followers said, we saw God. And then also, here's how Jesus was described. This is very important. Let's look at this. It described Jesus as being moved with compassion. He's described as his heart overflowed with compassion. That the tender compassion of Christ Jesus is described. And he had compassion on them. And one of the dominant things that we see about God and about Jesus is this idea of compassion, this feeling that comes at literally in the Greek, the word splagna, it's like this pouring out of your guts. And it's this idea that Jesus had this pouring out of his guts for people, right? Like, that's how deeply he felt compassion. And I believe that all of us want to be that way. That we want that to be described about us. That we want to have that feeling where we're deeply compassionate about people. And so our idea worth discussing today, kind of what we're going to talk about and what we're going to look into. Oh, I'm sorry. Before that, we're gonna look into this, and then we're going to give us our idea worth discussing. So let's look at this story of Jesus. He's walking down the road with some of his disciples, or the 12. A lot of times they're called the apostles. Remember, Jesus had many followers. He had all kinds of disciples. There were women and men, and there were children that were always around. But we're going to talk about the 12, and it says that James and John, okay, these are two brothers, the sons of Zebedee, came over and spoke to him, talking to Jesus. Teacher, they said, we want you to do us a favor. Okay, right? Like when someone comes over to you and they need a favor, how many of you are like, yeah, here we go. All right, what is your request? He asked. I'm sure much more lovingly than we do. They replied, when you sit on your glorious throne, we want to sit in the places of honor next to you, one on your right and one on your left. You see, they had this view of the kingdom. Some of you were here in our last series where we talked about happiness, and we talked about the kingdom of happiness. But they had a view of this very literal kingdom that Jesus was going to establish. It was going to overthrow the Roman Empire that was in charge at the time, that was oppressing their people. And they had this very literal kingdom view that Jesus was going to physically overthrow the Roman Empire, set up this new kingdom. And they were like, hey, when you're king, right, on this, like, let us be to your right and your left, right? Let us be right next to you. Like in the hierarchy chart, there's you, and then there's us, right? That's their request. Again, showing that they probably missed some of the kingdom talk that Jesus was talking about, because we learned that this wasn't this overthrowing physical kingdom the way that we understand kingdoms here on earth, but it was this place where Jesus reigns. It could be in our heart, it could be in our home, it could be in our church, it could be in our city. So he continues, and Jesus says to them, you don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I'm about to drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism of suffering I must be baptized with? And he's talking about this, and this is described oftentimes, Jesus, when he, what's referred to as the passion of the Christ, like this suffering that he was going to have. He talked about it as like a cup, right? Like a bitter drink. Can you swallow the bitter drink that I'm going to be drinking, and that I have to go through, that actually gets me to that place? That's the path to the kingdom. And they said, oh yes, they replied, we are able. I get really excited, right? And he just said, can you suffer like I'm going to suffer? And they're like, yes. It's very interesting. Let's continue. It says, then Jesus told them, you will indeed drink from my bitter cup and be baptized with my baptism of suffering. It's actually very interesting that most all of the followers, the 12, died the same way Jesus did, by crucifixion in some form. Even though they were spread out across the known world at that time, they did experience that. James, in the account, the Acts of the Apostles, we actually find that James, one of the guys he's talking to here, the guy who was in charge of their area, Herod Agrippa, who worked with the Roman Empire, had him executed, and he was run through with a sword. We find that John, throughout history, tells us that the brother, the other brother, probably the younger brother, was dumped into a boiling hot oil, and he survived it, and so they exiled him to the island of Patmos, right? Like extreme suffering. So when he says, oh yeah, you're able, well, you're going to. Right? You're going to suffer like I'm going to suffer. And then he kind of gives this aside. He says, but I have no right to say who will sit on my right or my left. God has prepared those places for the ones he's chosen. Right? So it's like, okay, well then can we go back on the suffering thing then, if that's not part of the deal? I don't know like how they felt. It's like, yeah, you're going to suffer like me, but I don't make this decision, this hierarchy, this power set up the way you understand it. That's not even for me to say. And so he continues. Now, when the 10 other disciples heard what James and John asked, they were indignant, right? They got mad. They didn't like that, right? Hold on. Why would you two get to do this? And then Jesus uses this as a teaching moment. It says, so he called them together and said, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. You ever worked for someone like that? You ever been involved with an authority like that? Right? Like that's oftentimes how we understand authority and power and position. Jesus is going to do something interesting here. He says, but among you, it will be different. Right? What we're doing here is different, he says. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others. And the Son of Man there is Jesus' preferred term to describe himself. He says, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So our idea worth discussing, we're gonna kind of parse out a little bit here today is this. Active service is the path to authentic compassion. Jesus was described as compassionate. We see that he was moved with compassion, but we also see that his entire mission here on earth, that everything he came to do, the thing that he highlighted was service, was serving other people. And so today I want to kind of pull just a couple things out of this passage to help us understand compassion and service just a little bit better as we talk about serving people. So, action leads to compassion. Let's look at it. First off, there's a countercultural perspective, right? If we want this action that's going to lead to compassion in our life, again, not just to be compassionate to people, but to be a compassionate person, we have to have a countercultural perspective. Because in us, just like there's greed, there's also this thing called pride. And it's this thing that for many of us, it's visible in our work life, right? Like in our career. We want this success. We want this level of notoriety. We want this thing that's going to propel us into being the best or achieving this certain level. For other people, it is involved in their money, right? Like that's how it's seen. And for others, it is in how much power can they accrue and can they acquire. And again, this is something that is easy to see in other people a lot of times. It's very difficult to see in ourselves. And Jesus says, look, here's the way it's done in our culture. People lord over other people. That their authority is misused. And what he's saying is not going to be so among you. We're going to flip it. And here's what we're going to say, right? If you want to be on top, you got to start at the bottom. And then we're going to flip it. We're going to rearrange our perspective. Our mission here, we talk about all the time, is we want to help people follow Jesus into a new life. And a lot of times that new life, that transformation, requires seeing the world differently than we've ever seen it before. And in this specific case, what he's saying is, you want to really be a compassionate person. You want to really be like influential, because that's what leaders are, right? They're influential people. You want to really be influential? Serve people. Be the slave. Let's flip it on its end. You've seen the examples, and you don't like it. These people didn't like being oppressed by the Roman Empire, right? People don't like being lorded over, being micromanaged. Like someone pulls the trump card on them, right? Like at work, and then they pull the title on them. No one likes that. He's saying we're going to flip it around, though. You want to reach real success. You want to be really influential. The first thing you got to do, you got to have a countercultural perspective. Flip it around. That's tough for us, right? Because we've been seeing things we've been seeing for a long time. It's very difficult to flip it around, but also not just a countercultural perspective, but then he shows them this counterintuitive sacrifice. He says that the Son of Man, right, this idea of who he was, where he was 100% God, 100% man, this humility that led to the sacrifice, that he comes to sacrifice, right? That this sacrifice was what was important. This idea that I would give my life up for other people. Maybe you know people like that. Maybe you know a really genuinely compassionate person, and the thing about them that makes you see how compassionate they are is their level of sacrifice for other people. They give themselves, right? They don't just give a little bit of money. They don't just give a little bit of time. They don't just give energy. They holistically pour themselves into others. And you look at them and you go, man, they're compassionate. Just something in them gives of themselves. That's how Jesus was described. That's how he was viewed. And he said, hey, that's what I came to earth to do. That was my mission, right? Was to flip this whole thing on its head and to be the sacrifice. To be what the world needs. Look at this quote here from step 12 of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says, until and unless you give your life away to others, you do not seem to have it yourself at any deep level. If you look at anything that involves transformation, it involves sacrifice. It involves others-centric mindset. That real transformation, the idea that I'm going to have the life that I've always wanted, involves, and almost always involves, giving that life away for the benefit of others. It's so different. It's so radical. It's so upside down. But the idea is this, is that active service, giving our lives away, leads to this authentic compassion. Giving our time, giving of our energy, giving of ourselves, and putting effort into loving other people in a special way. Active service is a path to authentic compassion. And so again, just like last week where we talked about combating our greed, we want to talk about this active service. And we're not just going to discuss it today. We are going to discuss it. And we're going to have you have a time where you can say, I don't know if I agree with that, or I see it this way or that way. That's okay. We're welcome to all points of view in this discussion. We think that's the most important part of what we do. But also throughout this entire month, we have this call to action. And so our call to action is to serve. We're going to serve at our laundry project in December. So mark your calendars, December 16th. But also today, you can go to our website, again, BeRich, or dtlbfaith.com/b-rich, and you can click on the serve link that's on there, and it'll take you to our page for you to register to serve on December 16th at our next laundry project. Don't worry, you don't have to touch anyone's underwear or fold anyone's clothes for them. We're simply there as we talk about creating space to discuss life and faith. We found that a laundromat is a great space to discuss life. We found it's a great way that while the tumble dry is going, people are sitting there, and instead of being on their phones or instead of us being on our phones, we're actually gonna FaceTime like old school, right? And we're gonna look at each other, and we're gonna talk about life. And every time we do this, we have just these stories that compel us to love like Jesus, to give like Jesus, to be compassionate like Jesus. We have these stories that compel us to view our neighbor differently and to be more for downtown than ever before. So there's two ways you can sign up. And our calls to action, we want you to do it today. We don't want you to leave without marking your calendar and signing up December 16th. We're going to have our laundry project. You can sign up at the computer in the back there. If you say, I don't really like computers, and you want to write it on the Connect card, you write on the Connect card and just write laundry project at the bottom and put your information on there. We'll sign you up online, and we'll make sure that you get the emails and the updates. Or you can sign up right from your phone, right from the website. I see people doing it right now, and I love it. That's what I'm talking about. But you can go to the computer, you can do it on the contact card or the Connect card, or you can do it sitting at your seat from your phone through our website. But we want everyone here, and there is a space for everyone. If we fill up our one location, we're going to have volunteers at a second location. We have 3 downtown locations that we're going to be hosting this laundry project at, and we have some other churches that are going to partner with us doing this, but we have plenty of spaces for you to connect with people and to serve people and to show some compassion. Because active service is that path that leads us to this authentic compassion, to make us more and more like Jesus, to transform our life. And again, that doesn't really happen unless we begin to be others-focused. So, that's our call to action. What I want to do is I want to pray for that call to action. I want to pray for our laundry project. I want to pray for you as you sit there and you decide, am I going to be a part of this or am I not? Am I going to make room in the calendar block on my iPhone, or am I not? Is this something I want to give myself to? And I want to encourage you to do that, but I also want to pray for us as you struggle with that decision. And we're going to log those hours for every person. We're going to log those hours, and we're going to put that into the bank, and we're going to have this. We're going to send it off to the churches that we're doing this with, and we're going to be able to include your hours into this gigantic wave of serving and giving and loving. So let's pray.